Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to be talking about dealing with feelings of loneliness and how to formulate healthy friendships. Before I get into that, I think it's useful just to consider if you do think to yourself, oh, I'm feeling an awful lot of loneliness right now, and that's my issue, and that's what I need to resolve. It seems like a worthwhile endeavor to just double check with yourself that it is actually loneliness that you're feeling. In my own life, I sometimes have suspected that loneliness can actually be an emotion that masks a sense of purposelessness or of not doing what you're supposed to be doing. It's a rare day when I'm doing my duties, my work, fulfilling what I would conceive as being my mission, where I would ever stop and sort of think, oh, I'm lonely. So just to start out with, just double check with yourself if you identify that way as having feelings of loneliness. Just make sure that that is actually what you're feeling, because if you dive in and you're like, oh, I need to cure these feelings of loneliness, and you find that's not what it is, you are engaged in a bootless inquisition. It's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to be a very fruitful endeavor. I had another thing to say and it fell out my ear. I'm not fully recovered from being sick. My brain is not firing on all cylinders, but I shall do my very best. Yeah, the other thing that loneliness can be is if we're living inside of a certain ideological space where we believe or are caused to believe that our problems would be resolved if there was somebody else there. So then it's not actually loneliness as such. It's more like a craving for a different state of being, a sort of a utopianism, a hopefulness that if only there were another here, everything would be okay. I see a lot of this. I think that this is very, very commonplace. It's very, very easy to fall into, believing that if there was another person in your life, everything would be okay. If we have time at the end, I'll go a little bit deeper into why I think that's such a problem. I actually think that's fundamentally philosophical and a religious and spiritual problem. We are trying to put other people where previously we would have put religion, spirituality, or philosophy, and it's doomed to failure. You do have, what are the drives from psychoanalytic theory? There's Frankl, the drive to meaning, there's the pleasure principle, there's the power principle. I think eventually Jordan Peterson's going to come out with the idea of a transcendence principle, all of which I agree with. I don't think that they fight one another. I think that it's sort of a unitary approach. But if we do have a need that goes beyond power and pleasure towards meaning and possibly even transcendence, you're never, if we accept that, you're never going to fulfill that through somebody else. The best that you would get is maybe a good year, and then eventually they would disappoint you, and the relationship itself would disappoint you, or love would disappoint you, depending on how you framed it, because it can't give you what it is that you're actually looking for. So right off the top, if we go meta with this, I'm going to make a claim, and that is that you, we need purpose as creatures. We need an overarching narrative to live our lives within. And if we don't have it, it makes sense that we're going to cling to each other. And it's not intrinsically bad. I'll get further into this if we have time at the end. In my view, philosophically, we don't have anything else. We don't have anything else. We have each other, and that's enough. But there's a difference between an individuated adult reaching out to an individuated adult for connection, knowing that it's limited, it therefore is intrinsically boundaried, and a child in an adult body bombarded with brainwashing and messaging, clinging on desperately to a parent. What do you call that? I've forgotten the psychology lingo. Let's just say parent substitute. So that's like not a healthy attachment style. It's the way a toddler clings to their mother is the way some people approach relationships. And of course, that generates more feelings of loneliness. So I'm going to answer this question. I'm going to answer it naively as best as I can. Of course, the really good answers can't come from a naive place. We have to deconstruct. We have to be somewhat postmodern in the approach and deconstruct what the coordinates of the question itself. Okay, this was upvoted. Two questions around loneliness and friendship. So from Zai Work, this whole thing is optimistic, by the way. This is an optimistic one. All of this is good. It has a happy ending. So don't be afraid. How do you cope with feelings of loneliness? Let me naively assume he means me. He doesn't. He means how does one? But how do I cope with feelings of loneliness? I very, very rarely get those feelings. And of all the humans I am aware of, I am the person who spends the most time on their own. I think in that sense, I'm a true introvert in the Jungian original sense, in that I draw energy from being on my own, and being around people draws energy from me. So I find it soothing, relaxing, nurturing. I need that. I need people. I love being around people. But this isn't particularly an issue for me. How does one cope with feelings of loneliness? I would rather that you all didn't cope. It's like when Slavoj Žižek talks about tolerance. He says he's a leftist and, a socialist, a Democrat. And he says, I don't want to tolerate. And I thought, that's a strange thing. And I'm like, yeah, that's right. Who wants to be tolerated? You tolerate mosquitoes. You don't want to be tolerated. We don't want tolerance. That's tepid. We should aim for something better than that. We should aim for something more than that. So I don't want you to cope. I won't be teaching you coping. I don't do coping. Coping is shit. Coping is like, oh, just hobble through another day. Maybe it'll be better tomorrow. It won't. When, as I goes on, when having no friend or anyone special in life, I feel envious when I go outside where I see any group of friends with girls or guys with their girlfriends. Sometime when I go to park or anywhere crowded, it kind of affects me. How can I cope with it? Like brushing it off, activating who gives a damn attitude. Well, don't do that. So don't aspire to cope, and don't suppress the feeling and falsely present a who gives a damn attitude. That's going to hurt you in the end. And I suspect it's going to generate more of the loneliness that you don't want to feel anymore. The question to me would be, how or why is this happening? And what needs to change in you? And when I say you, I mean the questioner, and I mean you as in one. It's this wonderful thing in English that you can't say anymore because it sounds terribly pompous. Even in England, it's terribly pompous. There's only one person who's allowed by British common law under license to use the word one, and it's actually the Queen. Would one like a cup of tea? She's the only person. We've banned everyone. I think you can be shot by a crossbow bolt from the walls of the castle if you say one. But we should reinstate it. It's really useful because in a sense it's pure. It's like it's philosophy and it's psychoanalytic theory in one, and it's psychedelic psychology in one as well. Because when you say how does one feel, you're actually saying in psychoanalytic terms, like, how does the self feel? How's the subject feeling? And there's an assumption that is psychedelic and philosophical, and empathic, which is the subject that you are is also the subject that I am. And I can empathize with your experience, even though we're not the same person. But at another level, you could read the one as being, how is the one? Well, I am the one. And truly, if I was engaged with the one, I would know what you were feeling, because we are one, aren't we? Yes, we are. We fused and merged. How do we find a solution here? I think the way that we find a solution here is through more of a oneness mentality and a unified mentality. You questionnaire, and people who liked this. So people liked this question because they resonated with the question. They went, yeah, I feel that. I feel a feel about that. How are you experiencing yourself? Like, if I dodge every question by saying it depends on your philosophy, it's going to get old really, really quick. However, it really does all depend. If you don't like that terminology, say, what's your map of reality? Like, what do you think life is? And you go, I don't want to answer, Richard, that question. I want to know how to not feel lonely anymore. And I'm like, well, sure. I mean, I could probably give you something cosmetic, but what kind of answers are you guys hoping for? Make friends? Go on a dating site and get a girlfriend? Isn't that a little cart before the horse? Why? How did you get to feeling this way? I say that's an ideological infection that has a philosophical solution. Who do you think you are? Who do you think you are? And I don't want to frustrate and exasperate y'all, the ones, but I have bad news for you. It's a very optimistic talk I'm going to give you today, but I have bad news for you. There is work that you cannot avoid doing. I mean this with all the love and sincerity that I can muster. I have to tell you the truth. And the truth goes beyond the boundaries of polite health and safety standard psychology. There is work here to be done, my friends. There is work here, plenty of it, for you, for me, and for humanity as a whole. You're going to have to answer the hard questions. What do you think the purpose of life is? So as I ask this question, how do you cope with feelings of loneliness? And I want to come back with, Zai, what do you think you are? And try and answer that question sincerely. Journal it every day for 7 days. Who do I think I am? What do I think life is? What do I think meaning is? What do I think the purpose of life is? What do I think the essential nature of reality is? Because let me strengthen my case for you doing something that's annoying and takes time out of your day. And I wish I could convince you that this is easy. I kind of wish to God, if I could do one thing that I could convince people that this is the easier way. I swear on my soul, I believe this is true. This is the easier way. Do the emotional literacy exercises, do the journaling, ask yourself the big questions. There's no solution that's going to stick from the frame of consciousness that you're at, where you're asking questions like this. There really isn't, my friends. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, but there's just not. What am I going to do? I'm going to tell you to alter your state, do some visualizations, I don't know, make some friends. Sure, dude, but you knew that. And you already knew that, but you already didn't feel like doing that. So is the problem knowledge? Do you need me to tell you what your grandmother or your auntie can tell you? Like, oh, just go out and make some friends and get a girlfriend. What did you ask me for if your auntie is going to tell you that? I'm just going to give auntie level advice. Sorry, aunties out there. I'm sure there's wise, profound aunties out there. But if you could get this advice like from a fortune cookie, what's the point in even trying? The level of consciousness with which you're approaching the problem is the problem. The problem is nothing. The problem is nothing. The problem is, it's like nothing. Now, people will comment and they'll say, oh, you seem so frustrated. I'm not frustrated. I've yet to find a way of conveying this to people. And I think it's more, it's sadness, because I know that people are going to see it and dump it. They're going to see it and toss it. They're going to see it and go, fuck that. Fuck off, Richard. Journaling? Dude, I'm just like, scrolling. Are you like this right now? It's okay. You can be like that. I'm like that sometimes. I just think, how do I look? If I have children and they came back from the future and saw me, their father or grandfather, you're stupid. I'm like, what am I doing? The precious seconds of my life just ticking away. Tick tock, ticking away. Whilst I giggle at a screen in a slumped, bad posture position. You've got to answer the bigger questions, like, what is the point of my life? And now is the time. I mean, my God, the world is unraveling in front of our eyes daily. And part of the reason why that is happening is, yes, we have failed, or we haven't failed. It's not done. It's far from over. But at the moment, we're failing to adult. We're failing to grow up. We're failing to ask the hard questions, and we're failing to answer them. We're failing to engage in reality properly. Of course, you're lonely, my friend. If you live a normal life, if you live the life of your friends, if you live the life of your family, if you live the life of your culture, if you live the life that's on TV, if you live the life that's in the adverts, if you live the life that the bank that you go to, that you use, has an avatar of you living, again, it's not hyperbole. I swear to you, my friends, I genuinely believe this is the truth. You will be miserable. Normal is miserable. Of course you're fucking lonely. This sucks. This stinks. It's the worst. It's the pits. Your leaders, the people who are paid to take care of things and do their jobs, they're corrupt. I don't even know what country you're in, Zai, but it doesn't matter, because I know that your leaders and your politicians are a shower of decadent scumbag gangsters because they are everywhere. Your parents probably sucked. The system that you were raised in probably doesn't work properly and is full of hypocrisy. Whatever culture, whatever religion, whatever, it probably really hurt your feelings somewhere along the way, because that's what happens. That's what it does. It stinks. So you're lonely. So join the fucking club, kid. It stinks. But just be free. Just say it fucking stinks. It fucking stinks, man. Rejoice. It stinks. It's not your fault. This is why these days I'm consuming so much Gnostic literature, and the more I consume it, the funnier it gets. Because the first time I read it, I was like, "This is dark, man," and I'm like, "No, it's a joke. It's funny. It's dark humor." But then the best humor is dark, right? The best humor is dark, and I have an optimistic message. It's not hopeful, but it's optimistic. I do think that things can be okay for some people. I do think that. But we have to let go of ideology. Now, I've said it and people hated it. Sam Vaknin said it and people really got mad at him for saying it, because he doesn't do as much sugarcoating as me. But you have to let go of hope. That's a really tough one, because you have to sort of deconstruct like what hope is. There's this sentimental, manipulative, narcissistic ideology. Now, you've heard ideology before and you go, I don't really know. It's something vaguely political. Slavoj Žižek keeps, that weird Slovenian guy with the lisp, he's always talking about it. So let me give you a different way of thinking about it. Again, this is not hyperbole. I genuinely believe everything I'm saying in this video is absolutely true, and I stand by it 100%. Sometimes I'll tell you stuff that's a little wild to get you to think and be like, oh, no, this is what I 1000% believe. When I say ideology, or anybody says ideology, or when they say hope, hear ideology. When you hear ideology, think mental virus that teaches you not just what to think, but how to think. It's parasitic, and it functions like a kind of artificial intelligence. It's a low-grade artificial intelligence that hooks into your software, and once it's turned on, you have answers to a whole load of different questions that makes you sound like everybody else. So it's it's dehumanizing, it's homogenizing, and it turns us all into androids. What was the Will Smith movie? There's two Will Smith movies. One, he was fighting a load of zombies, white zombies, and the other one was a bunch of white robots. So this is somewhere between the two. This is like, it's a zombie virus because it's parasitic, and it infects, and it's spreading. It's a pandemic, and it's infecting people right now. We're in the middle of a huge, like, ideological infection. But when we say ideological infection, it's not just like you'd think politics. No, no, no. This is everything. This is a way of looking at reality. So you're, in this analogy, you would be Will Smith, who's as lonely as can be. He's the last man alive, nearly, in that film, whose name escapes me. And in the other one, he's the lone hero against an army of hive mind artificial intelligence. So the android comes in when we say this is a software program and it's hooked in. And the point is to make you lonely. Well, it's not the whole point, but it's one of the points. Because if I can convince you that people are shit, that people are aggressive, that people are hostile, that you don't belong, that you need somebody, but that you can't have anybody. If I can alienate you from yourself, from your work, from your family, from your purpose, from the earth, have you turned into a hippie? I always was. I always was. I just pretended I wasn't for a while. From the earth, from nature, from your true nature, from your true self, if you're alienated, that's the most bitter loneliness you'll ever experience. It's the bitterest loneliness you'll ever experience. You're being cut off from your authentic self. So this is why I said earlier, it's a religious and a spiritual problem. Because if you naively, it's really hard in these times to embrace the naive religion, to naively embrace religion. But even if you fell out with your religion, the religion of your birth, if you could be forgiving for a moment and see it another way in a different timeline, you can see how meditation, prayer, submission to a higher force or higher consciousness, a sense of the pre-life and afterlife, a sense of divine meaning and reality. These are all religious and spiritual ideas, but we can see as good psychologists, which you all are. I just made you all psychologists, in nomine Patris et Filius et Spiritus Sancti. You're all psychologists. You can go, oh, so see outside yourself. The client now has a better relationship with themselves, because how are you supposed to communicate with the unconscious without religion? Nobody, like, how? What does that look like? Without angelic, demonic, daemonic, D-A-E, or jinn, as it would be in Islam, without chanting, without prayer, without a sense of yourself in the divine spectrum. Well, how are you supposed to do that? I'm not even advocating you become religious, really, but I am saying there are things that we need, and a relationship with our divine self is part of it. Of course you're lonely. Of course you're lonely. That means they've done their job. That means the archons are winning, because they're separating us from each other. Well, that's done. They won that one. Now the final battle is to separate self from self. Why? Because if I can separate you from yourself and I can make you feel so wretched, so exhausted, so tortured with loneliness, you won't fight. You won't fight. You won't fight for yourself. If you won't pick up a gun and fight for yourself, why would you do it for your brothers and sisters? So it's nothing less than the complete destruction of the human will that's the end goal here. So you come to me and you say, how do I cope with feeling lonely? Fuck a coping mechanism. You're in a war. You're in a spiritual war. You're a warrior in a war. So if you feel lonely, that's call to arms. It's not a physical war. Don't hurt anybody, people. It's not going to work that way. That's a call to arms, though. That's a call to, again, as it would be in Islam, jihad, which was always a spiritual war, and always was predominantly with the self, with our lesser nature, the demons of our lesser nature. So if you're feeling lonely and it's torturing you, don't think that the answer is going to be with another person who's probably just as ideologically infected, because you'll just end up doing the old, the old Balrog fandango. And you'll be Gandalf and Balrog plummeting for 3 days, beating, scratching, cursing each other and casting spells on each other as you plunge into the pit in a spilling, hellish, squalling, magical plunge. And you've already done that. You've already done the Balrog fandango. That's trademark, by the way. I don't want to see other people using that. That's mine. The Balrog fandango. It's mine. It's okay for you to feel lonely. It's okay for you to want to connect with other people and not know how. There isn't really people out there to connect with. So when you look and you see, I feel envious when I go outside where I see any group of friends with girls or guys with their girlfriends. There won't really be that many people, real people there. It's not their fault. And I'm not being dismissive or superior. It's not like cult mentality. That's the out group, we're the in group. We know. My God, we're probably all 3/4 infected ourselves. There's probably just a little bit left that's keeping us going. But in that tiny space, in that tiny little bit of space, there is still room to move. There is still something worth fighting for. It's not over yet. So don't cope. Don't cope. Look at it. Look straight at the demon. Look at it and ask it, what are you? It has to answer you. Demons operate by ancient laws. And when you ask them what they are and you ask them what they want, in every culture, they are bound by law to answer you. And you just say, what do you want? And if you can hear, it will tell you what it wants. It wants to trick you. It wants to trick you into despair. It wants to trick you into giving up. So cope with loneliness. No, I don't think so. I think that you should feel lonely. I think you're surrounded by people who feel lonely. All those people are out there in the park with friends, and you mentioned groups of friends in the park, they're probably feeling lonely as well. But have you ever felt lonely with people? It sucks so much more when you're with people and you're lonely, or you're even in an intimate relationship and you're lonely. That's the worst loneliness. I mean, you can still hold on to hope. I don't want you to, but you could if you're a weaker person. Be like, oh, if I just got over that hill to that utopia, everything would be okay. And then you fight and fight and fight and you get there and it's awful. This is why success in inverted commas kills so many people. We'll come back to that theme in a moment. Thank you for your questions, Amigurumi. I can't do that. Amigurumi. There you go. That's nice. Just gently in the top of the throat. What about friendships? ? I struggle to know what's normal or good because I learnt bad rules and I get CPTSD. As a result, I often don't know if I can trust my judgment. Well, similarly, like if I was to answer the question pettily and in a small way, I'd be like, okay, how do I get you to a place where you can learn the rules of boundaried friendship and try and push you into that space? And I would help you along somehow to help you to do that. But you've told me that you don't know what is normal and that you can't trust your judgment, so if I don't take the question at a petty level and I don't take the question naively and I use my nose is, I can say, this indicates to me, and you mentioned CPTSD, that you probably have quite porous ego boundaries, and in certain areas internally where you would be better off being stronger, the walls are a little weak, and so you can't trust yourself because you lack internal boundaries. So there's only really 2 ways that I know of to develop better internal boundaries, and neither of them is fun and neither of them is easy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you work, and you're going to go, work sucks and work is hard. But as I said earlier, I swear upon my soul, it is 1,000 lifetimes of suffering easier to do it this way. Believe me. Just all of you, please, just do the work, save yourself the pain, Because if you're locked in a certain cycle of consciousness, you can only process questions from that level, and you'll only come up with the same answers again and again. And from where you are, you can't see what your blind spots are. That's why they're called blind spots. You can't see what's in your shadow. That's why it's called a shadow. It's in the unconscious. So you could have a sense of yourself as being pretty switched on and pretty enlightened, and you know the psychology lingo, and you know a bit of spirituality lingo. But all of us, every single one of us, has to have a moment of humility to say, I really can't see myself. Like, I really can't. These eyes point out. I can't. I can do my best. I can take stock. I can try to be objective. My God, yes, do these things. Do try, but you can't see yourself. So then you have like an issue around consciousness, and it can only really be broken through work. What's the work I would ask you to do? If you're emotionally dysregulated, you're going to have to do something that emotionally regulates you. Because if you're emotionally dysregulated, your boundaries will be a mess and your perceptions will be a mess. I have methodologies for making you emotionally regulated, but there are others too. So you should find one that you like and that works for you. The most direct one that I like is the Stopping Emotional Flashbacks protocol and the emotional literacy exercise. You can get both of them on my other YouTube channel that's called Fortress Mental Health Protection System, and it's completely free. You never have to buy anything, but you do have to put the work in. And let me reiterate, folks, you're going to pay for this one way or another. Not me, and not with money. You're going to pay with time now or with pain later. It's as simple as that. You do the work now. Give it a month. We can change the course of the rest of your life for free. It's no risk. If you don't like it, just throw the pen across the room, screw up the paper and throw it in the bin. What did you lose? 15 minutes. If you will commit to half an hour to an hour of this work every day for a month, for just 1 month, it will change the course of the rest of your life. I guarantee it. Nobody ever just does it for a month. By the time you get to the third week, you'll have fallen in love with it. And every time you get problems in your life, you'll do it again anyway. So it's kind of a trick, what I'm saying to you, if you do it for a month, because I know you'll do it for longer. But there are places you can't. So there's muscles you haven't grown. And psychology doesn't seem to account for this. Well, like, do a push-up. Fucking can't, mate. No triceps, no pecs. I've been in a coma for all my life. Of course I can't do a push-up. And psychology goes, you can't do a push-up. Well, let me see. You either have no push-up-itis or you're unwilling. That's it. You're just an unwilling client who won't do the work. Never mind considering the possibility that you couldn't do the work. Or you have a condition. And if there's no condition, we'll invent one today to justify why it's your fault and not ours. Psychology didn't fail. You just have a problem that we've never seen before, but we never fail. And what I'm saying is sometimes you need the muscle. Where's the muscle going to come from? You got to do some reps. You got to do some, well, if you were in a coma and you had no muscle, you'd need like, I don't know what you need, like assisted physio movements to try and wake the muscle up. I don't know what they would do. But eventually, over time, at your pace, organically, you would build new neural pathways. You would build new muscle fibers in exactly the same way. And it would take as long as it takes for you. I don't know where you're at. But you need a means of doing that. You need a gymnos. You need a gymnasium to do that. The emotional literacy exercises is the most direct way you do that. You take out a piece of paper. You write down, how am I feeling? And then you try to answer that question. And it's not right or wrong. It's a wrestling match for you to get stronger. Similarly, the next thing I would have you do is I'd have you develop a moral philosophy from scratch. Don't be intimidated. Like every idiot who came out with a moral philosophy wore socks and had a sore back sometimes and bad breath occasionally. Fuck them. You can create a moral philosophy. You can do what Schopenhauer did. You can do what Kant did. You can do what Nietzsche did. Yes, they're very clever, But occasionally they spilt porridge down their chin and didn't notice it, and then walked around with a bit of dry splod on their chin. So don't get all, oh, I couldn't do it because they're all German and dead, or French and dead and ancient. Just do it. Just assume you can. It's your right to try. Doesn't even matter if you can't do it. How do you do that? On the daily, you ask yourself some questions, some good ones to start with. What is good, in my opinion? What is bad, in my opinion? How should a person live? These are good ways of slowly developing something that approximates a value system and or moral philosophy that allows you to live. And you might say, I don't want to do that because it sounds really hard. Okay, let me just give you a little warning. Do you want to be a person who has no personal idea of good and bad? Step out yourself for a second. You're a psychologist. I'm a psychologist. We're looking at a third person. Her name is Barbara. We went Gnostic again. Barbara. Right. Barbara is going to leave our clinic today. You and I have been working together with Barbara. And she seems to be fine. Psychologically, we resolved her attachment issues, her father thing, and the blah, blah, blah. We are going to let her leave. We didn't bother giving her any kind of a moral philosophy, though. Right. So Barbara's going to go out into this world that you know, with everything that's in it that you know, with no fucking idea what right or wrong is. She'll be all right. She'll be all right, Barbara. She'll be all right. Don't worry about Barbara. She'll be fine. No idea what right or wrong is. Because she has no idea what right or wrong is, can't distinguish a good behavior from bad, can't distinguish a good from a bad person, doesn't know a bad from a good investment, either financial or time or emotion, woefully naive, terribly fucking impressionable, moldable to the fucking fantasies, delusions, and darkness of whatever person wants to manufacture her consent. But we're not worried. Bye, Barbara. Bye-bye. Make sure you write never because you're not paying us anymore. That's it, right? Is that cool? Barbara has no idea of right and wrong, no filter for evaluating right or wrong, and no concept, no archetype, no ideal for how a person should live. But she's going to be just fine. Do you want to be Barbara? I fucking don't. I was Barbara. Didn't go too well for me. I was one of them yoga types. Just go with the flow, man, you know. Good vibes. If you think good thoughts, good things will happen to you. Oh no, I got robbed again. Oh no. So, back to your question. Ami Gurumi. It's my best Toshiro Mifune impression, but only when he's playing a samurai warlord. I nearly blew out a bit of snot then. I bet Nietzsche never blew out a bit of snot. I bet he did. If you just joined, I've been a bit sick this week. What about friendships? I struggle to know what's normal or good because I learned bad rules. Yes. You're probably and get CPTSD. So you're probably raised in a chaotic environment. What should happen, what could happen, what we will make sure happens in the future is that children are taught how to regulate their emotions, how to set boundaries with themselves and with others, and to know good from bad. Not with like some ultra strict, weird, religious, thou shalt not, but let them distinguish what's good and bad. Let's let them have a sense, because the world changes so quickly. Like, it's not one culture anymore. You can travel and you can meet all different cultures, and you have to like have a little minute. You need the ability to figure it out. And your parents didn't give you that. Your culture didn't give you that. Your education didn't give you that. Don't worry. That's normal. That's pretty much everybody now. So you have to teach you it. But I don't know a way that doesn't involve you getting out a pen and a piece of paper for half an hour to an hour a day, checking in with your emotions. Just do it. Just show yourself that care and validation to say, how do you feel about this? What's more loving than saying to a person, how do you feel about this? Because quite honestly, it doesn't really matter. You have to really love somebody to care about how they feel about a thing. It doesn't really matter. Like if you're a bit of a psychopath, not even a full one, just a bit of one, and you're not really harming anybody. Nobody's going to take you to court and divorce you because you didn't properly, fully care about their feelings. No, they won't divorce you. They'll just live their lives feeling a little bit sad, but they won't be able to explain why. Because the idea that we would afford each other that much time and attention to actually say, how do you care? How do you feel about this? Is alien now, because we are alienated. We're alienated from each other. We're alienated from our emotions. We're alienated from our bodies. We're alienated from our sexualities. We're alienated from ourselves. We're alienated from the unconscious. We're alienated from the shadow. And then people say to me, do you really think we're aliens? And I laugh and I go, do you really think we're not? How much more alien could we be? So, amigurumi, what I recommend that you do is that you focus on developing good internal boundaries, that you focus on developing a good moral system for yourself, and that it is a homegrown one, so that the muscles that got you to that place where you can know what you're feeling emotionally, because then your intuition will kick in and your boundaries will kick in, and then you'll be able to go, oh, my emotional intelligence is back on. This will take a while, realistically 6 months to a year. So you've got to give it a couple of months of work, and then 6 months to a year, your system switches on, and you'll be like, I know this person's okay, I know this person's not, and you make good decisions, and you build up what they're called reference experiences, and then you'll trust yourself. If I do some NLP hypnosis voodoo that takes you from not trusting yourself to trusting yourself, when you have no skills or strengths that mean that you should trust yourself, I'm just sending you out into the world like Barbara again. And then the other thing is you do need to develop a moral system so you can distinguish right from wrong. Friendships are whatever you want them to be. I mean, you are your half of the friendship, so you can define the rules. There are friendships that, to some would look very cold and distant. There are friendships that are very cozy and very intimate. Always think of a spectrum and always think of a scale. Never think binary with relationships. You never want to be thinking we're friends or we're not friends. And if we're friends, you're all the way inside my house. And if you're not my friend, I've got nothing to do with you. You want people on a spectrum. You want people at different levels of closeness based on what you see from them. And you never want to go too quickly because you've not had enough data yet. You have to wait, like a good scientist, for data to come through. And data can only come through over time. You don't get all the data on moment one. That's just not how reality works. Data comes through time, and you should adapt your level of intimacy with the person based on the information they give you about how safe they are. Something else I was going to say that was dead clever about that. I think I've got a bit of mucus in my brain right here. And the other thing is, I'm reading in between the lines here, and I could be projecting. And if I cross any boundaries with anybody or anybody asks questions, I apologize up front. But I'm feeling, I'm intuiting through my third eye. My chakras have awakened, and the unicorn is telling me that there might be a little bit of people numbness here. So if there's been a lack of contact with people for years, we can become people numb. There was a system of Japanese personal development developed by Dr. Masaki Hatsumi, who is the founder of Bujinkan Ninpo Taijutsu. Not a fantastic martial arts style, but he's very, very interesting as a system of psychology and healing. And one of the things that his teacher had taught him to do, very much in the style of Ueshiba Sensei of Aikido fame, was that it was good to isolate. Same as Jesus and Buddha and that. And, plenty of mystics, Greek mystics, Egyptian mystics, Mediterranean mystics, Palestinian mystics, like your Jesus was, would go off and spend time on their own. And there's a sort of a purifying element to this. You're away from culture. You could take a vow of silence and you're not really talking to anybody. I think Buddha and Jesus did 40 days and 40 nights. I don't know what's special about 40, but in the Masaki Hatsumi system, it was recommended to go out and try to live in nature on your own for an extended period of time. But he did say one of the downsides of that, it clarifies you, it cleans your senses, it cleans the mind, because there's very little stimulation apart from nature. But it can, his teacher warned him, I can't remember his teacher's name, Tanaka Sensei. He had this nickname, the Mongolian Tiger, even though he's Japanese. Kinetica Sensei, no. Anyway, his sensei advised him, you got to be careful because your heart can go cold. Your heart can go cold. So you have to stay friendly with nature. You have to try and talk to the birds and the animals and the trees so that your heart doesn't dim and become cold, because that could be what happened with your man there, you know, who wrote the Book of Five Rings. As in the end, he just lived on his own up in a cave, and people would come up there and give him food. He never married, never had any kids, pretty lonely life. And he was a great philosopher and a great swordsman because of that, but probably paid too high a price. So you want to reconnect with people, but when you're people numb, it's difficult. So don't have a system where you go stranger, friend. I have a system because I'm a bit odd, and I can be a bit people numb sometimes. I spend too long on my own and I get a bit weird, and I try and flatten it out. And when it comes to friendliness, I'm much more socialist. I'm communist. I'm like, it's our friendliness, comrades. And I will then make myself speak to more people in a more friendly fashion. And it's not easy for me. It's not easy for me. It's not natural for me. It's a discipline, but it's a healthy discipline because it pushes me outside of my comfort zone. Not everything that is good for you feels good. Not everything that is bad for you is necessarily going to feel bad. Sometimes a thing that you need to do can feel bad. A thing that is good for you can feel bad in the moment, maybe just outside the comfort zone. So there's my answers to those questions there. And there you go. I hope that was useful. I'll try and take a couple of questions now. I did ask this on my Instagram page as well, but nobody liked each other's questions, so I couldn't democratically do it via weight of likes. So I couldn't take the questions on Instagram. So if you have a question, fire away, ask it now, make it one sentence long and have it end in a question mark. Robert John McDonald says, not all those who wander are lost. That's true. Very true. Hi, Richard. If you could put a collective age on society, what age do you think we are? What do you mean? Like the ancient Egyptians, the Babylonians, or us right now in the West? I don't know. I suppose it's a fun game, isn't it? I think we're still in early adolescence. Well, sometimes I think we're adolescents, and sometimes I think we're about age 12. At the moment, I don't think we're seeing the best of what we've got to offer. So let me say 12. Nick Bravo asks, why is the criminal consciousness so pervasive and acceptable? Well, it's been hyper-normalized. Criminality and the lack of morality are now seen as virtuous. You're just a go-getter, a hustler, you know, you're prepared to do what it takes. You're a tough guy, a tough girl, you're a contender. And nobody just seems to stop and go, yeah, okay, being resilient, being tough, getting it done, being disciplined, even to the point of aggression, fine. But do we just stand back ever and just say, some of these people are just wankers? They're just horrible. They're just absolute flipping wankers. We don't seem to do that. And this is what I've identified, in my humble opinion, is a general problem, is we're living in a boundaryless time. So you can have periods of low morality or even junk values, but we're boundaryless with it. We never say it's enough. We scoff all the cake, snort all the cocaine, and nobody's going, oh, you know what? I think I've had too many lines. I think I'll stop. Everybody just keeps going. And I'm like, is there no adults here? Like, who's just going to be like, stop. And before you say it should be me, I'm a chap on YouTube. You've got police, politicians, journalists, runners of mainstream media, public intellectuals who've been paid to do this job for over a decade, for some of them several decades, and they're saying nothing. Why should I do it? Why should I put my head above the parapet when nobody else is saying anything? Why should I do it? It's not my job. Apart from anything else, it would be terribly presumptuous of me. So yeah, no, criminal consciousness has been a long time hyper normalized as being normal. I think there was different academics and philosophers who, particularly towards the end of the 90s, were saying we're moving into a period where what is considered mainstream is actually going to be quite niche and is going to be quite ghetto. It's going to be quite gangster. And you can every generation, every young generation is ghetto and gangster and criminal, because you should be. You're a teenager, you should be a rebel. So whether it's like the Mods and the Rockers, even, you know, the Beatles, everybody says they were like really staid and good boys and everything, but they're pretty naughty for their day. Elvis was naughty for his day. Johnny Cash was. The whole jazz scene, like you go back to the 20s and you're like, people with brains, like the most sedate middle class thing you could be today is into jazz. But in the 20s and 30s, if you were into jazz, that was like wildly sexual porn music from the devil. So every generation should be wild and criminal. What was I going to do? Mods, rockers, punk. In the 80s, you know, like you had people espousing openly criminal ideas. It started with like NWA, jumped up through the 90s, and then you had a whole thing which was gangster rap. And and metal, hair metal, industrial metal. It makes sense, and it doesn't really do anything. I think it's fine until you have people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s who want to pretend that they're in their 20s and in their teens. And we, you and I, Nick, and people in our generations are moving into the teenage spaces, are moving into the 20-year-old. So you've got teenagers and people in their 20s going, how are we supposed to rebel? I mean, really, nowadays, if your geography teacher has like neck tattoos up to here and one that goes on his tooth and his eyelid is pierced closed and it says dog ball bag or across his foot, what are you, that's your geography teacher. We set the bar there. Where are you supposed to go? Like, what do I do? Lop an arm off. How did I get there? I don't know. What's my rebellion? I just lopped an arm off. Oh, the questions are coming through fast now. Sorry, I'm not on my A game tonight, so I'm not pinging it with my fingers fast. Best protocol for trauma induced by ayahuasca. Oh, symptoms of dissociation and PTSD. I don't know, my friend. You should speak to a qualified clinician who specializes in drug-induced psychosis and drug-induced trauma, who's dealt with ayahuasca before. And they are out there. You can access most people via Skype and Zoom at the moment. And I highly recommend that you do that, because I would be pontificating and I could put you off target. So find a clinician who specializes in that. Eleanor from Holland says, do you think humans are not meant to be single? I don't know when the word and the category single started coming into English usage, but I've got a feeling it's quite modern. And I think it's a modern category because, and it has a meaning that really only applies to these times. So you got the first half of your question is like, do you think humans and humanity are meant, you could mean like culturally, religiously, biologically evolved to be this entirely modern category? For sure, there's been people who functioned throughout history who had neither wife, husband, or children, and were functioning, contributing members of society, for sure. So, ment. Matt W says conservative is the new rebellious. I think there's, in America, you could definitely make that case. I mean, you could definitely make that case. Megan Smith says, question. Oh, I love questions that start like that. What are your thoughts on microdosing psilocybin and how to effectively integrate while inducing neuroplasticity? Oh, I don't recommend that. I wouldn't recommend that. I've never taken psilocybin, and I wouldn't, on a public forum, recommend anybody take drugs to induce neuroplasticity. I've said in other videos that the ways of inducing neuroplasticity, I think I said, were like a traumatic initiation, psychedelic drugs, and some traumatic initiations, tribal traumatic initiations, use heroic doses of psychedelic drugs. What else did I say? There was a few things I offered, but the one that I recommended, because it's the safest, is just repetition and conditioning over time. That induces neuroplasticity. That lays down new neural pathways, and it's easily enough for what we want. So no, I wouldn't recommend that. Sarah says, question, can you tell us more about your views on the link between Celtic culture and friendship? Really interested to hear more about that. I don't know anything about Celtic culture. I don't know. That's embarrassing. I don't really know. Do you mean like modern Celtic culture? And whether Celts, because Celts are sometimes thought of as being more friendly. I think maybe I could speak to culture in general. There are places where people are observably more friendly. Like where I'm from, in the northwest of England, people will talk to anybody, and they'll be very, very friendly, to the point where I've had numerous times I've taken people up to Liverpool, and then we'll be out, and I'll just start talking to somebody, and they'll go, "Oh, do you know them from school?" And I'll go, "Who?" That guy you were just talking to. No, I just met him the same time. I just met him, but it's totally normal where I'm from to do not always, but you can. It's okay. You can just start chatting to somebody, and you can just do it off nothing. In fact, if you don't, you might be seen as being a bit off. The only place I lived like that was Dublin, not Dublin City, because, but the villages outside Dublin was like that. So yeah, those are the only cultures I've known that are super friendly like that. Super friendly like that. Dr. Sean Berry says, if my community tells me that I'm not as important as another because of my race, how do I cope? Not big on coping, not big on teaching people how to cope or be tolerant. These are funny times now, and I don't mean funny, ha. They're not funny at all. They're rather sinister. I'm really worried about this stuff, you know. I'm really worried that we're like, I find myself watching a lot of stuff about Stalin and Hitler. I'm like, I had Operation Anthropoid, which was about the Nazi occupation in Prague here. Fucking hell, they were bad. Ooh, Jesus, the Nazis were bad. And they were bad everywhere, but fucking hell, they were horrible here. And then I was watching something about Goebbels on my laptop, and then on my phone I flipped it open, and it was something about Stalin, and I'm like, why am I tuned into all this stuff on totalitarianism? And I tell you, I really feel like we are in the seed phases of creating another big historical error. We're going to do it again, because we obviously didn't learn from the last two times. And it starts with dividing by ethnicity. Now, I know Stalin didn't do that, but he divided by class. And if you analyze the discourse of what's going around now, sometimes class and race is used as a smokescreen. So what's implicit is class. So you could argue it's basically divisive. I mean, but we have to, well, I don't know what we have to do. I don't know what the should is. I can say what is, I can observe what is, and my observation is it is total lunacy, and it's entirely regressive, not progressive. It takes us back a good 60 years of progress if we start focusing on how much melanin somebody has in their skin, the shape of their face and their hair. And I struggle. So it makes me very sad. I struggle to see how anybody's falling for it. I'm like, where do you think this goes? Did it go well every other time we went down this road? Has it ever gone well where we start picking out? And why are these the things we pick out? There are other things you can pick out, but these are the things we're picking out, and these are the things we want to focus on. And we want to say, well, because you're pinkish beige, these are the rules for you. And because you're cafe au lait, these are the rules for you. And because you're another, and I'm like, where's your chart? Get your chart. I want a color chart. Don't just do it. If you're going to do it, don't do it out the side of your mouth. Pick up a color chart, put it against my skin, and point to where I am. Let's do it properly. Let's make a proper game of this, and let's do it properly. Because one of the many things that I see happening is a lot of, in the sort of the freeze response of the shock and the horror of these things coming back, a lot of presuppositions are slipping in. And it's just a given. There is like 1,001 givens just slipped inside of a sentence. And I think it's disgusting. I think it's really awful. And I think anybody who advocates for it, knowingly or unknowingly, this is not hyperbole, is advocating for evil that has historically led with a straight line of consequence to a genocide. And we are really, really playing with fire. And anybody who advocates for it at any level of leadership, whether they're running a corporation or whether they're running a country, in any form that they advocate for it, is doing evil. There's no good that will ever come of this. No good ever has come of it. So, yeah, I don't know what to tell you, my mate. I don't know how you should handle it. I can only reflect on what is, and I think it's... I can only see extremely dark consequences as a result of this if it continues. Let's see what this year brings. Maybe we'll snap out of it. We'll wake up from wokeness. Watch Preacher. I'll give anything a go at the moment. Preacher. All right, I'll give it a go. Yusra says, what does it really mean to accept something? Well, it's a really interesting, open-ended philosophical question as we meander towards the end of this live stream. I feel like there should be 20 of us sat in a room, just in robes. What does it mean to accept something? The absence of resistance. You cease to resist the idea of it. You cease to fight it. And you yield to the reality that it is. And then you accept it. Something like that. Do you know about David Icke? Yes, I interviewed him on this channel 3 weeks ago. And that interview was deleted in 17 hours. Pixie Not Dust says, Richard Grannon, UG Rose mentioned that you two are going to do a podcast on her channel. When? Probably this week. I'll send her a message after this. We'll probably do it this week. I think we're going to discuss the tarot. Don't forget the sitars. I would never forget the sitars. I just got bought bongos the other day. You guys bring the sitars, I'll bring the bongos. Elena Martinez says, Freud said psychoanalysis is of no use with the Irish because they already live in a dream world. What are your thoughts on such a statement? I wasn't aware that he did say that. I know that he said the Irish are the only race I've encountered who cannot be penetrated by psychoanalysis. I wasn't aware of the follow-on thing, because they live in a dream world. If he did say that, it's interesting. It is not a culture that lends itself to psychoanalysis. I have stories, but I don't know which ones I can. When I moved to Ireland, I wanted to move my business there and start paying tax there. And I spoke to, I set up an appointment with an accountant for 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and he arrived half an hour late. And he'd had a jolly lunch, and he was red-nosed. And I said to him, I want to set up a business here, and I'd like to start paying tax in Ireland. Can you help me set that up? And his reply was, and why would you want to do that? And I said, because I live here and I want to pay tax here. And he was laughing. He was laughing his head off. He was like, why? But why? Why would you do that? Why would you do that? I was like, because it's the law. It's the law. I have to pay tax here. And he was laughing at me. And we had a good long chat. And it went on for about an hour. And he was telling me about Irish culture and English culture. And at the very end, I said, listen, this has been great. Thanks so much for all your advice. What do I owe you? And he went, oh, it's nothing. And I was like, am I in a film? You can't all live like this. This can't be what living in Ireland actually is. But it actually is that. I have many such stories. I didn't even live there very long. I was there like 6 or 7 months. But yes, I liked it very much. But why would you do that? And he looked at me like I was crazy. He was like, oh, this poor young man. Does he need a cup of tea? Does he need something? He's obviously not well. Zombie child. Oh, no, that's not to me. Okay, so hit me with a question, and then we'll start wrapping this up. Okay, Andrew Chamberlain. Here's a good one. And Richard, I've heard you talk about vulnerability not being the virtue we think it to be. What got us to the point where we worship and push for vulnerability, and what do others gain from this? I like this question. Here's what I think. Andrew. I think you see this across the board. Now, we're living through a period right now where you see people citing science as though it is like one ubiquitous force in one country, and not just millions of people having a say with millions of agendas, some paid, some unpaid, some under political pressure, some are just mad, some are like, science is, if you've ever operated at all within or you've ever had insight into scientific research, it's not ubiquitous, and it's not like free from ego or corruption at all. Not at all. If you want meta-analyses of the debunking of multiple scientific papers for glaring mistakes, all that's out. There are YouTube videos on this that go back years ago. They did a random analysis of scientific papers. There's a YouTube video on this. I'm sorry, I don't know what it's called, but it was something like meta-analysis of scientific papers researched. And the YouTube video reported on the peer-reviewed work. And this peer-reviewed work was a meta-analysis. A meta-analysis is where you take other people's peer-reviewed research and you look at it, and then you do an analysis at the meta level. And it found over 50% of the papers had major flaws in the methods. Now, I know some of you do read research papers. I occasionally read them for psychology. I don't read the method. I ain't reading that. I read the intro and the abstract, I'll read the abstract, the intro, and the conclusion, and I might have a little look, because I mean, when it comes, like, without wanting to get waylaid, when it comes to psychology, whenever you look at the methods are always dodgy, because it's psychology. Like, there's never a large enough sample size, number one. So anyway, so we live in a time where you have this idea of science, and it's not the reality of what science is. So it's seen as being ubiquitous and unitarian, and it's just one thing. Or, sorry, it's talked about like that. Nonsense. Never let anybody browbeat you with the idea that the science says this. Nonsense. Like, that just doesn't exist in any field, psychology or biology. It's never that clear. Nothing is non-contended. Or very few things are completely uncontended. There'll always be some nutter somewhere who wants to contend it. There'll somebody be like, no, fuck you, second law of thermodynamics. You didn't think about the Glebel law. You know, like something that everybody has established. Some scientist will disagree with it. So what happens? Humans, they get like a thing. They get a tool. We get a tool, and we go, this tool is a boss tool. This is really cool. And I see it as being like a kid. We're like children. So the child gets a toy, and let's say I really liked B.A. Baracus when I was a kid, and I had a B.A. Baracus toy, and you could do this on the back of his head with a lever, and he'd go like this, right? And I took him everywhere. I thought he was boss. I really liked B.A. I liked the character. I thought he was funny. And I don't know, just liked him. And I wanted to play with him all the time, which is okay, except that not every game can involve BA. Like, not every game can involve BA Baracus. You're not always playing the A team, and you're not always playing with action figures. Sometimes you'll be playing hide and seek. Sometimes you'll be playing cowboys. Sometimes you'll be playing war. Sometimes you'll be doing something else. And BA doesn't belong there, but he's your favorite toy. Science can be like this. We can find something in science and go, this is brilliant. Let's apply it to everything. Psychology is guilty of this across the board. People find a thing and it works, but it doesn't work for everything. It's a kind of a dogma, like psychoanalytic theory. Amazing revelations within inside its own paradigms, but it's not the end of the story, and it's not the right tool for every job. Far from it. So I'm one of these people who's like, yes, Freud, absolutely a genius, absolute, and Jung and Adler, absolute revelations, but even absolute revelations are limited. They don't apply over here. They don't apply here. They don't apply here. They don't apply here. So what happened with vulnerability is the following. We had a revelatory moment. Absolute revelation between a client and a therapist, all things being equal, which they almost never are. Between a client and a therapist, all things being equal, the moment at which authentic breakthrough can occur, can only occur if the client is vulnerable, and if the therapist is capable of mirroring that vulnerability in a boundaried way. So, oh my God, like, if we focus on vulnerability and the sessions, and we bring that consciousness to the sessions, what happens? Well, you have highly accelerated sessions. Like, progress is made so much faster in such a shorter period of time through accessing vulnerability. And great things can be done. There are great healings that are taking place as a result of vulnerability. What happens then? We start to overestimate the wonderful tool. And I tell you, it's really dangerous. Like, the pure shite I've heard spouted about vulnerability in the years since there was one person, great TED talk, fantastic, and she was 100% right. But wow, that blew a lot of people off course. It really blew a lot of people off course. So this is why I'm careful with what I say, because you can say a thing that is true, but you don't know how people are going to hear it. So some people heard her message and took vulnerability, which is an essential part of life and an essential part of the counseling process, and it's an essential part of the grieving process, and it's an essential part of healing. And they deified it. So this is where people talk about science versus scientism. Scientism is where we deify science and we start to treat it like a religion. Similarly, people started treating vulnerability like a little tin god. And they're like, vulnerability, worship at the altar of vulnerability. If vulnerability works for my counseling and my healing, maybe it'll work when I'm making a sandwich. Maybe it'll work when I'm buying a ticket for the bus. Maybe I should be more vulnerable when I'm making business relate, and on it went. And it was like, well, hang on a second. You're bringing B.A. Baracus to other games now. He's no good for these other games. He's not, like, don't do that. So it was an over application of a very, very strong, very, very powerful model that got fetishized. And people started talking about it as though it was like the philosopher's stone from alchemy. And in a certain context, if everything else is set up within the system and the engine looks like this, and the client is at this point, and the therapist is here, and you're moving, and everything is perfect, and you take, like it's a Tomb Raider, you pick up the precious gem of the philosopher's stone and you slot it into the right place, amazing things happen. And they really are amazing. I mean, I could even go so far as to say there's certain things that can only happen that will happen in therapy only if the philosopher's stone of vulnerability is there. But that doesn't mean it's a lifestyle modality. Far from it. But it got fetishized. Look at the similar, a very similar but different neighboring concept from yoga and Vedic teaching. Yoga in the West, Vedas in the West. What do they call it? Surrender. And it's like, yeah, man, if you're meditating or you're doing yoga and you're trying to melt into some pretty otherwise pain-inducing positions, or meditating in a position that's painful in itself, surrender is the right thing to do. But it doesn't mean, what, are you going to drive in a state of surrender? You're going to do business deals in a state of surrender? This is crazy. This, to me, I think is a Western problem. But doesn't mean it's not there in the East, because East is West now. You go to Malaysia, you go to Thailand, you go to these countries. I've lived in some of these countries. Like, it's as Western as we are here. It's fetishization, and it's this divisive mind. The mind that is dividing is, in my humble opinion, is egoic. It's narcissistic. Why? Because unity consciousness doesn't feed my ego. It doesn't fill my narcissism. If I'm you and you're me and we're everything, how am I special? How can I be king if we're everything? So we have this very egoic, very narcissistic mind that splits. It splits everything up. It divides. Everything that divides is ego mentality in the Vedic sense of the ahamkara. It's egoic. And that which unifies is non-egoic, because it doesn't serve the ego. If it's unity consciousness, narcissism just melts, because you're not even a thing. You're not a thing that can be worshipped. You sort of melt away into the vast oceanic experience, and you don't want that if you're trying to be a good narcissist. So I think the same thing happened with vulnerability. Is it was deified egoically. It was deified Western, but the East is just as guilty of this now. It sort of became adapted and adopted into spiritual materialism, very, very much so. And it became a useful way of bullying people. Like, you going, oh, you're being stiff and egoic. Why don't you just find it within yourself to surrender and give me $797? You know, I really feel like you could do with the experience of being vulnerable. So why don't you just trust me more and give me more money, or give me more intimacy, or give me more of something else that you shouldn't be giving to a therapist or a coach? And this goes on. It's like, as we're talking now, it's happening right now all over the world. So I feel personally like Pandora's box was opened, and it was a dangerous thing to let out, because it's so easy to misinterpret it. Nothing should be given in a boundaryless way. Nothing. The only thing that should be given in a boundaryless way that I can think of off the top of my head is love for children, love for your children, love for your children. Everything else, you like, if you don't draw a boundary around it, it gets sick and it corrupts. And I'm afraid vulnerability was one of these things. Plus, to add another layer to this, because I find this topic fascinating, because I'm like, God, why did this meme, this misunderstood meme, get stuck in so many people's heads? It appeals to a certain worldview. It appeals to a certain way of doing reality. It appeals to a certain way of doing life. And so you get people who are in their comfort zone for their value system and how they typically process reality. And they're kind of lazily just going along doing what they already want to do. And they could take vulnerability as a concept, not really live it, not really be vulnerable, but say it. And it fed into the same story of what they were already doing. So there's a laziness to it as well. Vulnerability in and of itself is critical. It's absolutely critical. But in my humble opinion, we should use as little of it as possible in the therapeutic or the life. Like, where in life are you benefit? Like, what? We never evolved to be vulnerable. We didn't evolve to just lie around waiting for predators to eat us. That's really dumb. And then the people who are pro vulnerability be like, that's not what vulnerability means. And I would say, you can't change the meaning of a word. You don't have that right. If you want to change the meaning of the word, come up with another word. You call it something else. The vulnerability has a meaning. That which is left vulnerable is exposed to attack. Specifically, clinically, literally, no ifs, buts, or maybes. That is what vulnerability is. If the person in question meant something else, she should have said something else, but she didn't. Anybody who understands psychology in the therapeutic process knows what she meant. When you are in therapy, you must be vulnerable to predators. That's the last place you want to be when you're in a therapeutic situation, because you're talking about predators from your past having come to you. So the great revelation was, the very last thing that you want to do here in your interaction with me is the thing that you must do in order to heal. And it's kind of like a hero's journey. You have to courageously be vulnerable in a place where you really don't want to be. And some alchemical transformation occurs. Yes, in that boundary context. But vulnerability is not a guide stone for a way of life, nor is it a virtue. It's not a value. When I do values exercises with people, sometimes that comes up. People say, being vulnerable. And I just think, oh dear, I think this person's going to have stories of narcissistic ex-boyfriends and ex-girlfriends in their life. I don't know, you kind of go, well, of course. Vulnerability is not a value. It's like obedience and submission. These are not values. That's not a human value. You can't aspire to being obedient, and you can't aspire to being vulnerable to predators. That's not a value. But let me be clear, I'm not criticizing the person who popularized the idea. Her TED Talk is very popular for a reason. And if you listen to the words she says and you color in the lines of what she says, she doesn't put a foot wrong. I probably wouldn't have said it because I know how prone to misinterpretation these things are. Like, you really have to load things one way, because people love the idea of be vulnerable, surrender, float down the stream, let what happens happens. And I'm like, yeah, absolve more responsibility, abrogate more of your adulthood. I'm onto you. I know what you're trying to do. It's not right. It's not the right way to live. So your question actually said, I've heard you talk about vulnerability not being the virtue we think it to be. Covered that. What got us to the point where we worship and push for vulnerability? So worship is a really important word for me on the concept of vulnerability. There's become a vulnerability worship cult. But it's I don't think it's anybody's fault. I think it's human nature. We hear what we want to hear. And if it fits with a doctrine, people have, like, I push for a moral philosophy, yeah? And people come to me and they go, I have a moral philosophy. And I'm like, you have an ideology. Some of you don't even have, like, really, you don't even have an ideology. What you have is a series of what Louis C.K. described as believies. They're sort of reference points, and they're more to do with, like, it's not an ideology. It's definitely not a philosophy. It's not really an ideology. It's kind of a series of tendencies. I was going to say rules, but rules would be too strong. It's a series of tendencies for how you get things done. This is really no good. That leaves you vulnerable. and you don't want that. You really, really don't want that. So I could go on about this for a while. And I won't torture you more with that. I'm very much in the camp that believes if you let life happen and you just sit back and do nothing, no good can come from that. And if some good does come from that, you didn't earn it. So you won't be happy with it because you didn't fight for it. And I know of no stories where good came from people just letting life happen. I know of only tragedy at various levels. I've seen people, I actually know a very good friend of mine who let life happen and he ended up, not bad. I mean, he's moderately miserable, like everyone. But he lives a comfortable life and, you know, he's fulfilled the settings of the tribal push and people are basically happy with him and he has a position and he has a job and he has standing in the community and you go, yeah, okay. That's as good as it gets, folks. I personally aspire for a little more than that. And I imagine people who listen to me go on for an hour and 25 minutes do too. Let's just stop there, my dears. I hope that that was useful. Thank you so much for your time and for your attention. Please do protect your time and your attention at all costs. Many people are fighting a ferocious battle for your time and your attention. The two most precious currencies you have can't be refunded. Protect them at all costs. And so I thank you for sharing those with me. And I hope that your trust was well founded and that I rewarded you for your trust amply. And I look forward to speaking to you all again very soon. Cheers.